They say a man's home is his castle. But for the 101 people in this video, their home became a demolition zone. Thanks to 5-minute internet tutorials and an extreme dose of unearned confidence, these amateur handymen decided they didn't need to pay professionals. From knocking down load-bearing walls to turning their living rooms into indoor swimming pools, we are counting down 101 of the most catastrophic, expensive, and hilarious home renovation fails in history. Grab your hard hat, because this is a masterclass in why you should just hire a contractor. 1. One DIY genius watched 30 minutes of a home flipping show and decided he desperately needed an open concept layout. He grabbed a heavy sledgehammer and entirely obliterated a load-bearing wall. 20 minutes later, his master bathroom bathtub crashed through the sagging ceiling right onto his expensive kitchen island. 2. Why pay a licensed plumber when you have internet hacks? One homeowner tried fixing a cracked main water line using waterproof tape from a viral video. It held perfectly until he left for work. He came back to a literal indoor geyser and $60,000 in completely avoidable water damage. 3. A budget warrior bought a used hot tub but absolutely refused to pay for an electrical panel upgrade. He wired the massive heater into a standard outdoor outlet using cheap extension cords. The resulting spark melted the tub into a toxic puddle and completely burned down his covered back porch. 4. Hardwood floors are pricey, so one couple decided to pour cheap resin over their entire living room. Trying to save money, they totally ignored the mixing ratios. 2 weeks later, the floor was basically a giant sticky fly trap. A professional crew had to scrape the entire house using heavy-duty shovels. 5. A homeowner wanted a luxury, heavy slate roof, but ignored the fact his old house was framed for lightweight shingles. He proudly stacked 3 tons of stone up there himself. The very next morning, the roof caved in, flattening his garage and crushing his vintage sports car under a pile of rubble. 6. Installing a custom shower is easy, right? One amateur skipped the waterproof membrane and glued expensive Italian marble straight onto standard drywall. 6 months later, the walls turned to absolute mush. The heavy tile detached and crashed right through the rotting floorboards directly into the basement. 7. A neighborhood tough guy rented an excavator to dig his own swimming pool. Thinking he knew best, he ignored the bright utility flags and ripped straight through the main neighborhood gas line. The city evacuated 3 blocks, and he got slapped with a $100,000 emergency repair bill. 8. Kitchen cabinets hold hundreds of pounds, yet one arrogant husband mounted his brand new uppers using cheap plastic drywall anchors instead of finding the wooden studs. Right during dinner, the cabinets ripped off the wall, shattering his expensive granite countertops and pulverizing every single drinking glass. 9. Spray foam insulation is great, but it expands with terrifying force. One guy filled the gaps around his expensive new windows and just kept on spraying. The foam cured incredibly hard, bowed the vinyl frames inward, and instantly shattered 5 expensive custom glass panes all over the floor. 10. Wanting a man cave with high ceilings, a guy grabbed a shovel and started digging out his basement floor. He had absolutely zero clue about structural integrity. He dug right past the concrete footings, causing the entire exterior house wall to buckle inwards. The city immediately condemned his totally ruined property. 11. A weekend warrior installed a brand new bathroom exhaust fan, but didn't bother running the ductwork outside. He just vented all that hot, humid shower steam directly into his attic. Fast forward a year, and his entire roof decking was a furry, collapsing black mold nightmare. 12. Moving a toilet seems straightforward until you realize floor joists are in the way. Instead of rerouting the plumbing pipes, one guy just sawed completely through 3 massive support beams. The very next week, his heavy cast iron tub plunged right through the floor into his living room. 13. Everyone loves modern dark exterior colors, but painting cheap vinyl siding charcoal black is a guaranteed disaster. The dark paint absorbed so much intense summer heat that the plastic literally melted. The exterior of his house ended up looking like a drooping candle in just one afternoon. 14. After pouring a beautiful new concrete patio, a lazy homeowner decided to wash his heavy tools and leftover cement right down the kitchen sink. The concrete settled and perfectly cured inside the main cast iron sewer line. He had to excavate his entire front yard to fix it. 15. Drywall and rain are natural enemies. One budget builder enclosed his covered patio using standard interior sheetrock to save $50. The very first heavy thunderstorm turned his brand new walls into a soggy, crumbling pile of wet oatmeal, completely ruining his expensive outdoor furniture underneath. 16. Back in the day, some guys used a solid copper penny to bypass a blown fuse. One stubborn grandpa kept this terrible tradition alive in a totally outdated electrical panel. Instead of the fuse blowing, the wires dangerously overheated, melting the walls and completely gutting his kitchen. 17. Landscaping is supposed to direct rainwater away from your foundation. But one proud homeowner added massive flower beds that aggressively sloped directly backward into his siding. The first spring rainstorm completely flooded his finished basement, turning his expensive home theater into a muddy swimming pool. 18. In a passive-aggressive war with his neighbor, a guy built a massive privacy fence out of pure spite. He completely ignored the official property lines to make a point. A court order forced him to tear down the $10,000 custom fence because it was 3 inches over. 19. When replacing a toilet, the cheap wax ring is literally the most important part. A confident amateur decided to skip it entirely because it looked gross. Every flush slowly leaked raw sewage directly into the subfloor until the toilet actually fell sideways while he was using it. 20. Wanting a vaulted ceiling in his master bedroom, a guy went up and cut out all the horizontal attic beams. Those collar ties were actually holding the framing together. After the first winter snowstorm, the heavy roof pushed the exterior walls outward, collapsing the entire structure into a pile of toothpicks. 21. You absolutely cannot lay rigid hardwood flooring over an uneven subfloor. One arrogant house flipper ignored the massive dips and just nailed the expensive oak boards down anyway. Walking across the living room sounded like popping bubble wrap, and the boards violently snapped under normal foot traffic. 22. Power washers are incredibly satisfying until you use the 0-degree nozzle on fragile old brick. A guy blasted away the dirty moss, but pulverized the ancient mortar holding his house together. He managed to pressure wash his own chimney right off the side of the roof, completely destroying his front porch. 23. Insulation is tricky if you do not understand basic condensation. A DIYer installed the plastic vapor barrier on the wrong side of the exterior walls in a freezing climate. Moisture got trapped inside the fiberglass, completely rotting the wooden studs and turning his house into a soggy sponge. 24. Mounting a giant flat screen. Television is a classic weekend project. This guy used massive lag bolts to hit the studs. He completely missed the wood and drilled directly into the main PVC plumbing stack. His brand new television got baptized in raw upstairs toilet water. 25. A leaking pressure relief valve on a water heater is a major warning sign. Instead of fixing it, one brilliant homeowner just plugged the valve with a solid brass cap. The tank built up extreme pressure and blasted through the garage roof like a rocket, landing 3 houses down the street. 26. Epoxy garage floors look amazing, but surface preparation is absolutely everything. A guy completely skipped the acid wash and poured toxic chemicals over greasy, oily concrete. The expensive epoxy never properly adhered, peeling off in massive sticky sheets every time he parked his hot truck tires on it. 27. Sick of massive puddles in his yard, a homeowner illegally routed his roof gutter downspouts directly into the city sewer line. During a massive thunderstorm, the overwhelmed system backfired violently. A geyser of raw city sewage erupted out of his downstairs toilet, completely destroying his newly renovated basement. 28. Securing a heavy wooden deck to a house requires proper flashing to keep rainwater out. One lazy builder just bolted the ledger board directly over the vinyl siding. Years of trapped moisture totally rotted the house framing, causing the entire deck to rip away during a family dinner. 29. Dry scraping an old popcorn ceiling is messy, but ignoring a professional asbestos test is purely reckless. A guy spent the entire weekend grinding the toxic ceiling dust into his carpets and HVAC system. He permanently contaminated his whole house and paid $30 grand for professional hazard abatement. 30. Finishing a basement is fun until those ugly steel support columns get in the way of the pool table. A guy grabbed a heavy sledgehammer and removed 2 of them for extra clearance. The very next day, the entire first floor dangerously sagged a whole foot into the basement. 31. A guy hated the noise of his basement sump pump discharging outside, so he cleverly rerouted the pipe straight into his laundry drain. During a massive spring thaw, the overwhelmed municipal sewer system violently reverse flushed 1,000 gallons of neighborhood waste directly into his finished man cave. 32. Stripping an old roof is hard work, so one lazy homeowner just nailed new heavy asphalt shingles directly over 3 existing layers. The massive combined weight immediately cracked the wooden rafters. The very first heavy snowfall completely collapsed the entire structure right into his upstairs bedrooms. 33. Leaving a garden hose attached during a freezing winter is a total rookie mistake. A proud homeowner ignored frost warnings and left his hose connected all January. Ice aggressively expanded deep inside the copper pipes, bursting the main valve and entirely flooding his newly finished basement. 34. Running a new dryer vent through thick exterior brick seemed too difficult for one amateur handyman. He decided to just dump the hot, humid exhaust directly into his dark crawlspace. 2 years later, the trapped lint and endless moisture rotted the floor joists into a massive termite buffet. 35. Floating floors absolutely require an expansion gap around the edges to breathe. A perfectionist husband ignored the instructions and jammed the rigid laminate planks perfectly tight against his baseboards. As summer humidity rolled in, the expanding floor buckled upward, creating a massive trip hazard mountain in his hallway. 36. When the microwave kept tripping a 15-amp breaker, a guy thought he could outsmart basic physics. He simply swapped the breaker for a massive 30-amp switch without upgrading the thin wire. The overloaded cable glowed red-hot and entirely burned down his custom kitchen cabinets. 37. Attic storage is highly valuable, but prefabricated roof trusses absolutely cannot be modified. A confident dad took a circular saw and aggressively chopped out the diagonal bracing to fit his holiday decorations. His roof immediately sagged in the middle, looking exactly like a broken horse saddle. 38. Building a tall retaining wall requires proper drainage rock behind it. A guy trying to save cash just backfilled his new decorative block wall with heavy wet dirt. The very first rainstorm built up massive hydrostatic pressure, entirely blowing the heavy blocks out and burying a parked car. 39. Push-to-connect plumbing fittings are great for quick visible fixes, but you never bury them behind permanent drywall. A lazy flipper used 30 cheap fittings inside a custom shower wall instead of soldering copper. One tiny leak completely destroyed the entire bathroom subfloor over 6 months. 40. A homeowner wanted a solid concrete front porch but absolutely refused to demolish the rotting wooden deck underneath it first. He poured 3 tons of wet cement directly over the decaying pine boards. The heavy slab violently cracked and collapsed into a totally useless jagged pile within days. 41. Painting exterior brick is incredibly trendy, but you absolutely must use breathable masonry paint. A cheapskate bought standard interior latex on clearance and heavily coated his house. The trapped moisture completely pulverized the brick, causing the entire facade to literally crumble right onto his front lawn. 42. Placing a custom bookshelf right over the main cold air return vent is an incredibly stupid mistake. A guy literally suffocated his brand new furnace. The starving system severely overheated, cracking the expensive heat exchanger and permanently ruining a $10,000 HVAC setup in just one single week. 43. You simply cannot thread a copper water line directly into old galvanized steel without a dielectric union. A confident amateur did exactly that under his sink. The aggressive chemical reaction rapidly corroded the metals, causing a massive blowout that entirely flooded his expensive hardwood floors while he slept. 44. Upgrading to thick tile flooring is great, but you must raise the toilet flange to match the new height. A lazy guy just stacked 3 cheap wax rings on top of each other to bridge the gap. The inevitable blowout soaked his brand new ceiling on the first floor and ruined his expensive leather sofa below. 45. Concrete slabs in newer homes often have high-tension steel cables hidden inside. An arrogant plumber rented a concrete saw to move a drain without scanning the floor. He sliced right through a tension cable, which whipped out of the slab, shattering the foundation and condemning the newly built property. 46. Hanging heavy ceiling drywall requires coarse thread screws explicitly designed for wood. A cheap homeowner used hundreds of fine thread metal screws he found in his garage. The smooth threads entirely pulled out of the joists, dropping the massive ceiling squarely onto his expensive glass dining table. 47. Building a custom tile shower base is completely useless if water cannot actually reach the drain. A weekend warrior poured a perfectly flat concrete pan. Every single shower created a massive stagnant swamp of soapy water that permanently stained the expensive floor and smelled exactly like a dumpster. 48. Refinishing hardwood stairs requires extreme patience. An impatient guy slathered thick, clear polyurethane over dark wood stain that only dried for an hour. The chemicals reacted violently, creating a milky white, permanently sticky disaster that completely ruined $5,000 worth of custom oak treads. 49. Roof leaks almost always happen directly around the chimney. A cheap guy just slapped a massive bucket of black tar around the brick instead of installing proper metal flashing. Summer heat melted the tar right down the shingles, leaving massive gaping holes for rainwater to entirely destroy his attic. 50. Believing that aluminum gutters ruined the sleek architectural lines of his house, a pretentious homeowner simply ripped them all down. Every rainstorm sent sheets of water pounding next to his foundation. The immense hydrostatic pressure cracked his basement walls, turning his lower level into a permanent swamp. 51. Installing thick foam board insulation inside a damp crawl space without a vapor barrier is basically building a terrarium under your house. One confident dad ignored the code and trapped all that ground moisture against his wooden floor joists. The resulting rot eventually dropped his grand piano right through the floorboards. 52. Never pour industrial drain cleaner down a sink and then call a professional plumber without warning him. A cheap homeowner dumped 3 entire bottles of pure acid into a clogged pipe. When the plumber arrived and ran his expensive steel snake down the drain, the chemicals melted the equipment and triggered a lawsuit. 53. Hanging heavy kitchen cabinets onto old plaster walls requires specialized anchors and finding the actual studs. A confident husband just blindly shot standard drywall screws into 50-year-old crumbling lathe. During Thanksgiving dinner, the entire wall gave way, destroying $1,000 worth of fine china in seconds. 54. Polyurethane spray foam is explicitly meant for tiny air leaks. A totally incompetent builder used 40 giant cans to insulate an entire exterior bedroom wall instead of rolling traditional fiberglass. The expanding force of the curing foam pushed the exterior siding outward and literally snapped the wooden studs in half. 55. Running electrical wires right through the sharp edges of steel. Framing without plastic grommets is a guaranteed fire hazard. An amateur pulled hundreds of feet of bare cable behind his new basement drywall. The vibration from his surround sound system quickly rubbed through the insulation and shorted out the entire house. 56. Everyone wants a luxury soaking tub in their master bathroom upstairs. However, one guy ignored the structural weight difference and installed a solid cast iron tub without reinforcing the floor joists. The wood literally groaned for days until the tub plunged right through the ceiling onto his expensive dining room table. 57. Painting over expensive brass door hardware to modernize a house is incredibly stupid if you skip the primer. A cheap flipper just heavily sprayed thick black matte paint right over shiny brass knobs. After exactly 1 week, the sticky paint completely peeled off, ruining 20 expensive custom doors. 58. Building a custom deck around a living tree looks absolutely incredible in architectural magazines. But one arrogant homeowner left zero room for the trunk to actually grow. 5 years later, the expanding oak tree swallowed the wooden framing and literally ripped the heavy deck right off his back door. 59. Flexible foil dryer vent hoses are terrible for lint buildup inside dark walls. A guy buried 50 feet of that cheap ribbed pipe behind his brand new drywall. The inevitable blockage dangerously overheated his expensive gas dryer, starting a hidden fire that entirely gutted his freshly painted laundry room. 60. Mixing heavy bags of concrete in a plastic wheelbarrow requires a proper mixing hoe. A lazy guy tried churning 500 pounds of wet cement using an electric drill and a cheap paint mixer attachment. The overloaded motor sparked and died, leaving him with a solid, unusable concrete sculpture in his driveway. 61. Tiling a shower floor absolutely requires a perfect downward slope to the drain. A weekend warrior just slapped thick stone tiles onto a perfectly flat concrete pan. Every single shower created a stagnant swamp of soapy water that slowly rotted the baseboards and permanently ruined his expensive wooden vanity. 62. Attempting to cut heavy tempered glass for a custom shower door using a cheap manual tile cutter is incredibly stupid. A confident husband scored the thick sheet right on his driveway and tapped it with a hammer. The entire thing instantly exploded into a million tiny jagged cubes, destroying the paint on his parked truck. 63. Installing luxury vinyl plank flooring over an uneven concrete basement slab is a rookie mistake. A cheap flipper skipped the self-leveling compound and just snapped the rigid boards together anyway. Every single step created a loud, hollow crunch, eventually snapping the joints and ruining $3,000 worth of flooring. 64. When your heavy garage door spring snaps, absolutely do not attempt to fix it yourself with basic hand tools. A stubborn homeowner grabbed a pair of cheap locking pliers to adjust the tension. The steel spring snapped back like a whip, taking out the windshield of his prized vintage sports car. 65. Replacing a toilet requires shutting off the main water supply valve first. A confident amateur thought he could work fast and unbolted the pressurized tank anyway. A geyser of freezing cold water erupted into the ceiling for 20 panicked minutes until he finally located the Main Street shutoff in the dark. 66. Using cheap interior caulk around an exterior wood window frame is incredibly foolish. A guy spent hours perfectly sealing the gaps, but the water-soluble acrylic literally dissolved during the first major thunderstorm. Rain poured directly into the wall cavity, totally ruining his newly laid hardwood floors in the living room. 67. Connecting thick copper pipes to old galvanized steel without using a proper dielectric union is guaranteed to fail. A confident dad soldered the mismatched pipes together under his expensive kitchen sink. The chemical reaction rapidly corroded the metals, causing a midnight blowout that flooded the entire first floor while he slept. 68. Running a high-voltage wire explicitly for a new hot tub directly across your backyard grass is totally insane. A cheap guy refused to dig a proper trench to bury the conduit. 2 weeks later, he ran over the hidden cable with his lawnmower, frying his expensive riding tractor in a shower of sparks. 69. Refinishing antique hardwood floors requires a heavy-duty walk-behind sander. A completely stubborn guy tried using a tiny handheld palm sander for an entire living room. 3 totally exhausted weeks later, the floor looked exactly like a wavy potato chip, and he still had to pay a professional to fix his mess. 70. Never shoot long nails through baseboards if they are attached to a sliding pocket door frame. A totally confident amateur drove 2-inch finish nails straight through the hidden thin wood compartment. His expensive custom door was permanently pinned inside the wall, forcing him to rip down the brand new drywall. 71. Installing a spinning ceiling fan directly onto a cheap plastic light fixture box is a classic amateur move. A confident guy wired it up, flipped the switch on high speed, and the heavy rotating blades immediately ripped the entire mounting hardware straight out of his newly painted ceiling. 72. Draining an in-ground fiberglass swimming pool completely empty to scrub the bottom is dangerous if you live near a high water table. The hydrostatic pressure from the wet dirt actually popped the empty shell right out of the ground, leaving his backyard looking like a shipwrecked plastic boat. 73. Using regular silver duct tape on threaded natural gas pipe joints instead of yellow Teflon tape is a recipe for disaster. A cheap homeowner quietly leaked gas into his basement until his furnace kicked on, triggering a massive flash fire that completely melted his brand new expensive heating system. 74. Trimming a heavy oak branch hanging directly over your roof with a cheap electric chainsaw seems like a great weekend project. A totally arrogant dad misjudged the angle and dropped 2 tons of solid wood directly through the glass roof of his brand new, incredibly expensive sunroom. 75. Running brand new copper wiring and carelessly splicing it directly into 80-year-old cloth knob and tube wiring is totally insane. A confident amateur just tightly twisted them together in his hot, dusty attic. The electrical resistance immediately sparked a fire that gutted his historic wooden roof. 76. Washing thick leftover drywall joint compound directly down the master bathroom sink is an incredibly expensive mistake. A lazy weekend warrior let the heavy plaster perfectly cure inside the main trap. He had to smash his custom expensive vanity to pieces just to replace the rock-solid plumbing pipes. 77. Planting exotic running bamboo directly next to a concrete foundation for absolute privacy is incredibly foolish. Within 3 short years, the incredibly aggressive root system pulverized the cinder blocks, piercing through the basement walls and literally sprouting up right next to the washing machine. 78. Nailing vinyl siding perfectly tight against the exterior wall sheathing entirely defeats the purpose of the material. A stubborn guy hammered every single nail absolutely flush to the plastic. The very first sunny afternoon, the expanding siding buckled outward, making his brand new house look wavy and incredibly cheap. 79. Standard interior hollow core doors are extremely cheap, but absolutely useless against harsh outdoor weather. A budget flipper proudly installed one as the main back door. The very first heavy rainstorm completely delaminated the thin cardboard veneer, leaving a massive gaping hole straight into the kitchen. 80. Using a standard household vacuum cleaner to suck up massive piles of ultrafine drywall dust completely destroys the internal motor. A guy vacuumed his entire newly renovated basement with his wife's expensive Dyson. The microscopic dust blew straight through the filter, permanently coating his upstairs furniture and frying the machine. 81. Completely forgetting to install a standard P-trap underneath a brand new custom shower drain is an absolutely putrid mistake. A confident amateur proudly finished his expensive tile work, only to have incredibly toxic raw sewer gas permanently pumped directly into his luxury master bathroom every single day. 82. Tightening the brass bolts on a brand new toilet tank requires extreme finesse. A totally arrogant guy grabbed a steel wrench and just kept cranking down on the nuts. He cracked the expensive porcelain base right down the middle, flooding his entire newly remodeled bathroom with gallons of cold water. 83. Using a high-powered open-flame blowtorch to strip old peeling paint off dry wooden siding is a total gamble. A stubborn grandpa thought he was being totally efficient until the old dry cedar instantly ignited. The hidden embers smoldered inside the walls, eventually engulfing his detached garage in flames. 84. Replacing a hot water heater is fairly simple until you forget to reattach the metal exhaust flue pipe on top. A confident dad proudly fired up the gas burner, pumping invisible carbon monoxide into the house. Luckily, the alarms blared, and the fire department had to kick down his expensive custom front door. 85. Building a custom staircase but messing up the basic math leaves you with completely unequal step heights. An arrogant carpenter had one single step that was exactly 2 inches taller than the rest. The building inspector immediately failed the project, forcing him to tear out $10,000 worth of custom oak woodwork. 86. Venting. A humid bathroom exhaust fan directly into an old, unlined brick masonry chimney is a structural mistake. A cheap guy rotted the ancient mortar from the inside out. The brick stack eventually collapsed directly into his antique living room fireplace, crushing his expensive flat-screen television. 87. Pouring heavy, massive concrete foundation footings during freezing winter weather without using any thermal-chemical additives is a guaranteed disaster. A stubborn builder entirely ignored the icy forecast. The frozen water violently expanded inside the wet mix, completely crumbling the massive heavy blocks by early spring. 88. Slapping standard interior drywall directly against a scorching hot, wood-burning fireplace insert is incredibly illegal. A cheap homeowner completely skipped the required fireproof cement board to save $40. The paper backing immediately ignited the first time he built a fire, entirely burning down his expensive living room remodel. 89. Using thin, cheap lamp cord wire to hook up a brand new permanent wall outlet is a massive hidden fire hazard. An amateur buried the tiny copper wire behind his new baseboards to avoid cutting drywall. Plugging in a standard space heater instantly caused the entire wall cavity to burst into flames. 90. Hanging heavy sheets of drywall without properly staggering the vertical seams creates incredibly weak joints. A totally arrogant weekend warrior lined up every single edge perfectly straight from floor to ceiling. The natural settling of the house immediately created ugly cracks running straight down the middle of every single room. 91. Dropping a heavy cast iron farm sink straight into an incredibly cheap particle board kitchen cabinet is a terrible idea. A budget flipper entirely ignored the structural weight requirements. The thin pressed wood immediately buckled, dropping the heavy sink directly through the plumbing pipes and flooding the brand new kitchen. 92. Painting thick layers of cheap primer directly over toxic black mold is the absolute worst landlord special ever. A cheap owner completely refused to fix the underlying roof leak first. The aggressive fungus literally ate straight through the fresh white paint in less than 2 weeks, looking like a horror movie set. 93. Installing a heavy slate pool table on a slightly cantilevered wooden second-floor balcony is asking for a disaster. A totally confident guy completely ignored the structural limits of his deck. The combined weight immediately snapped the wooden joists, dropping his expensive billiards table squarely onto the patio furniture below. 94. Splicing a brand new modern dishwasher directly into corroded 80-year-old galvanized steel plumbing is asking for trouble. A lazy guy tightened the wrench too hard, completely snapping the fragile rusted pipe right inside the dark wall. He went to work and came home to a totally flooded kitchen and ruined baseboards. 95. Trying to quiet an incredibly squeaky HVAC blower motor belt by spraying it with highly flammable lubricant is completely insane. A confident dad absolutely soaked the spinning rubber belt. The intense friction immediately ignited the aerosol chemicals, blowing thick, toxic black smoke straight through the vents and ruining the house's carpets. 96. Covering a structural foundation crack using cheap standard silicone bathroom caulk is completely useless. A cheapskate guy entirely ignored the shifting soil outside. The heavy concrete wall buckled right past the thin rubbery seal during the first spring thaw, flooding his finished basement and ruining his custom home theater. 97. Refusing to rent a heavy floor sander and just using cheap liquid chemical stripper on antique hardwood is totally awful. A confident wife dumped 5 gallons of toxic gel onto the wood. It completely dissolved the expensive old glue, curling every single custom board and permanently destroying the entire floor. 98. Drilling a hole directly through the bottom of a fiberglass bathtub because the water drains slowly is absolutely unhinged. An angry homeowner took a half-inch drill bit straight through the tub floor, permanently destroying it and flooding his expensive downstairs living room the next time someone took a shower. 99. Trying to install a custom skylight using a dull electric chainsaw is a brutal way to ruin a good roof. A confident dad ripped straight through the heavy asphalt shingles and entirely severed 2 structural wooden trusses. His entire attic ceiling immediately sagged, requiring a massive crane and 30 grand to fix. 100. Installing expensive, thick granite countertops directly on top of completely unleveled cheap wooden base cabinets is incredibly foolish. A stubborn guy entirely refused to use basic wooden shims to level the surface. The heavy stone snapped perfectly in half, right down the middle the very first time he set down a heavy pot. 101. Taping a piece of thick plastic over a broken roof skylight and totally forgetting about it is a huge gamble. A lazy homeowner ignored it until the heavy winter snow finally arrived. The weight ripped the tape, dumping 50 pounds of freezing wet snow and ice directly onto his bed. So, which one of these absolute geniuses owes their insurance company the biggest apology? Was it the guy who sawed through his own floor joists, or the amateur who pressure washed his chimney off the roof? Tell me your pick in the comments, and if you actually own a tape measure and know how to use it, hit like and subscribe before you leave.